Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding from Golding & Golding, here to discuss the basics of the Delinquent Form 8938, late filing, penalty, and abatement. In recent years, the IRS has increased enforcement of the Form 8938. Typically, penalties are not as prevalent as some of the other forms like the FBAR or the 5471. But lately, we've had a lot of taxpayers come to us to let us know they've been hit with what's called a soft letter. It's a letter from the IRS saying, like, for example, hey, the IRS received notice from foreign financial institution in country X that you have these accounts. When the IRS looks at your current tax return, they see that that information is not in the tax return, and basically it's a recommendation that you file, and you probably should. And so it's important that when you're filing a delinquent Form 8938 that you do it properly. Form 8938 is a relative newcomer, right? It was introduced on the 2011 tax return. It's used to report specified foreign financial assets. It includes most bank accounts, financial accounts, foreign life insurance policies, foreign pensions. Whether or not overseas crypto is reportable is still up for debate. But if you look at the recent proposed FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement proposed regulations, they're proposing that it should be reported on the FBAR, which would mean at the end of the day that it will probably be required on the Form 8938 as well. The Form 8938 is filed at the same time a tax return is filed. It's not filed separately. A very important thing to keep in mind and how some taxpayers get into trouble. The FBAR, which is a similar form, is filed whether or not a taxpayer has to file a tax return in a given year if they otherwise meet the threshold for filing. Form 8938 is only required to be attached to the tax return when the tax return is due. So if you don't have to actually file a tax return in the current year, then you don't have to file a Form 8938. What some people do mistakenly is they go back and they just file a Form 8938 with the tax return because they met the threshold for filing a Form 8938, even though they didn't have to file a tax return in that year. You may be setting yourself up for a potential penalty, so there's no need to do something like that. If you want to file for an extension on your Form 8938, you don't have to file a separate form. You just file it along with the tax return. So in other words, if you file an extension to file your tax return, the Form 8938 goes on extension as well. You don't have to file a separate Form 7004, which is used for other items such as Form 3520-A. When you late file a Form 8938, it's important to go through the voluntary disclosure reasonable cause channels. Oftentimes a taxpayer will approach us because they didn't file the 8938. They go back to their accountant or their CPA and they just kind of file an 8938 without providing sufficient reasonable cause or without any statement, which is almost a recipe for disaster. So what happens next, right? Oftentimes a taxpayer will contact us because they received what's called a CP15 notice of penalty, or they finished an audit or examination. It may have nothing to do with offshore accounts, but somehow it led into that, and then they ended up getting dinged on the Form 8938. Another way these days a lot of people are getting hit with penalties is because someone else, a third party, might have done a voluntary disclosure, streamlined disclosure, and there might have been a joint business account or another family member not realizing that now the IRS can cross-reference it easier, and they didn't tell you that they did this, right? What kind of family member is that? Ex-business partner could be out of spite, but family member should let you know. And so then you just end up getting a notice of penalty. Penalties can be civil. There's been a handful of criminal enforcement for FATCA, but I would say 99.99% of the time, at least for now, it's just a civil penalty. The penalty starts at $10,000. It can go up from there, depending on how many Form 8938 years you had to file and whether you file it soon after it's due or whether you have what's called a continuing penalty. You only file one 8938 per year to include all your assets on that particular form. If you're out of compliance for prior years, don't just run off and file a Form 8938. Speak to a board-certified specialist. Speak to someone that you trust wherever you are to kind of go over the basics and give you the lay of the land. If you're willful, your only option is going to be the Voluntary Disclosure Program, or VDP, if you're inclined to make a disclosure. Otherwise, you may have the streamlined domestic, streamlined offshore. You may qualify for reasonable cause. There used to be something called the Delinquent International Information Return Submission Procedures. They're still around, but they've pretty much morphed back into a reasonable cause statement. These should be filed timely, and make sure that you mark off all the important aspects. Make sure that you show reasonable cause if you're non-willful. Make sure the certification shows you're non-willful. Don't write a 30-page dissertation. That's not what the IRS is looking for. If you want information about streamlined or other offshore disclosure items, we have lots of it available on our main website, goldinglawyers.com, or on our YouTube channel. If you want to schedule a reduced fee initial consultation, just reach out to the firm. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.